Good morning. Thank you for your registration to this webinar. My name is Carolina. This Doing Business in Ecuador webinar will explain how to set up in Ecuador and will cover from the form of entry of the share capital, the type of company to be incorporated, the forms of social administration, as well as an overview of the tax and labor regime. Ecuador is located in South America. The country has an area of 283,000 square kilometers. It has 24 provinces, and its capital is the city of Quito. Ecuador main economic activities, the exploitation of mines, render services to businesses, manufacturing industry, construction, agroindustry, fishing, transportation, and communication. Ecuador offers clear regulations on corporate tax and labor system, which are key elements for the promotion of investment and entrepreneurship. Let's go through corporate matters. How to set up in Ecuador. Setting a foreign company in Ecuador can be a great opportunity. You have, first of all, to know your options, whether register a branch or to incorporate a new company. You have to designate a representative. You have to grant an authorized representative with sufficient powers to act on your behalf. The required documents, the certificate of existence, the articles of incorporation and bylaws in force, resolutions of the board of director or assembly authorizing the establishment, and the required share capital and appointment of a proxy or representative. Institutions involved: the Superintendency of Company Securities and Insurance, the Mercantile Registry, and the Internal Revenue Service. If you have employees, the Ministry of Labor of Relations. If you intend to bid in public tenders, you have to register your company in the Ecuadorian Suppliers Registry and justify compliance with certain parameters, such as minimum specific share capital, previous experience, among others requirements. How to set up in Ecuador, and for that, there are three considerations for foreign companies. The first one, for certain legal acts that have the quality of sporadic or isolated acts, the Article 6 of the Law of Companies establishes that domiciliation is not required, but it is mandatory to have an attorney in fact or representative in Ecuador, whose power is to respond to lawsuit or comply with the obligations required, indeed. The second one, for carrying out activities in Ecuador, such as the execution of public works, the rendering of public services, and the exploitation of the country's natural resources. And the final one is if you're planning to exercise directly and habitually your economic activities in Ecuador. For the first case and the second one, in order to be able to operate or acquire obligation, it is required to be domiciled in Ecuador. Company formation. In Ecuador, 100% foreign ownership is allowed. The minimum number of shareholders is 2 and can be individuals, legal entities, or both. All legal entities in Ecuador need a president or a chairman and a general manager or CEO. The president and the CEO may be the legal representatives. And the most common types of companies in Ecuador are limited liability and unlimited liability. Company formation. Limited liability company. The maximum shareholders are 15. The minimum share capital is $400, and the legal reserve or reserve fund is 20%. For corporations, the capital is divided into shares that can be listed on the stock exchange. The minimum share capital is $800, and the legal reserve or reserve fund is 10%. And from foreign branches, you have to appoint a resident individual as permanent representative. The minimum share capital is $2,000, and it is also required a certificate of existence. The incorporation process, the company's name reservation. You must check in the superintendents of companies that the name has not been taken, the company name you have chosen. Drafting of the bylaws. It is the social contract that will govern the company and is validated by a minute signed by a lawyer. Reduced to public deed. In this process, you have to submit before the notary public the company's name reservation, the capital integration account certificate, and the minutes with the bylaws. The notary public approves the laws and publishes in the newspaper. Then register of the company in the mercantile registry. At this point, the previous mentioned documentation has to be submitted to the mercantile registry of the canton whereas the company was incorporated in order to register the company. Obtaining the enabling documents. With inscription in the mercantile registry, the superintendents of companies will provide you with the documents to open the books, that is the tax ID of the company. When forming a company in Ecuador for limited and liability companies or unlimited liability companies, this process can be done either online or following this normal manual process. We strongly recommend the online process because it is a lot easier and faster. There is a new type of company that was introduced in Ecuador. This is the Simplified Shares Company in Ecuador. What is a SAS? It's a new type of company that allows to reduce the cost and time of registration of companies that are limited liability companies. The main objective of the SAS is facilitating entrepreneurs in carrying out their business activities. And its main features, the first one related to the purpose of its creation, and the second one related to the legal characteristic of this type of company. General characteristics of the SAS in Ecuador. It is a company that considerably reduces the barriers to entry since its incorporation requirements and costs are very low or almost non-existent. Creates a greater freedom and comfort when carrying out business activities. SAS can be incorporated by one sole shareholder. Other type of companies requires at least 2 shareholders. It allows the company to regulate itself with greater flexibility, and it can incorporate private resolutions such as protocols, shareholders agreement, non-competition agreement, among others. The autonomy of will of the company shareholder prevails, and it favors access to credit through public or public institutions. Limitation of limited liability. Individuals who are shareholders of the SAS will be liable to creditors only up to the amount of their participation or the capital they own in the company. Limited liability is also extended to labor and tax obligations. Legal personality. Once the company is registered in the registry of companies of the superintendents of company securities and insurance, it is legally incorporated and therefore a legal entity is formed, distinct and independent from the shareholders. And the independent legal personality means that the company is an autonomous subject capable of contracting rights and obligations. Unlisted shares. SAS shareholders may not be listed on the stock exchange except for the issuance of debentures. Limitations with respect to the activities. These types of companies may engage in all permitted activities and therefore may have a broad corporate purpose. Notwithstanding the foregoing, they may not engage in activities related to financial operations, stock exchange activities, insurance, and others that may be considered as special activities. The sole proprietorship. As indicated previously, this type of company can be incorporated by only one shareholder, as opposed to the traditional structure for corporations or limited liability companies, which requires at least two shareholders. Legal representation. Its legal representation falls on a single person and does not require the position of general manager and president established by the company's law for limited liability companies and corporations. Transfer of shares. The shares are freely available and negotiable and may be freely transferred by means of a transfer note. Shareholders' acts or agreements may be made to limit or set rules for the transfer of shares for up to 10 years. This company have common and preferred shares. Regarding the share capital, this type of company does not require a minimum capital for its incorporation. In case of setting a minimum capital, money or goods can be contributed, and the shareholder may request and review the financial statements not less than 5 days prior to the date of the meeting at which the related matters are to be discussed. What is the process for its incorporation? The first step, reservation of the denomination through the portal of the Superintendent of Companies, Securities, and Insurance. Then drafting of the bylaws. The third one, the next step, in the event that the incorporation is carried out with the contribution of real estate or asset that require a public deed, the company must be incorporated by means of such instrument before a notary public. 4, registration in the registry of companies of the Superintendents of Companies, Securities, and Insurance. 5, obtaining the single taxpayer registry, tax ID. And the last one, if the incorporation was made with a contribution of money, the company's bank account must be opened and the amount agreed must be deposited within a term of up to 24 months. Let's go through tax matters. Taxes. First of all, VAT, VAT is levied at the rates of 12% or 0%. Goods and services subject to the 0% rate are explicitly specified in the law. The income tax is 25%. The special excise tax and the currency outflow tax with a rate of 5%. Income tax according to the ownership structure, the 25% rate applies for residents in Ecuador and for non-residents located in non-tax havens or lesser taxation jurisdictions. The 28% rate is for non-resident shareholders located in tax havens or lesser taxation jurisdictions. And when company's ownership structure was not duly disclosed before the Ecuadorian authorities, which has to be made in January each year. Let's go through the tax regime for micro-enterprises. A new tax regime for micro-enterprises was established in the year 2020, including entrepreneurs who fulfill the status of micro-enterprises. This regime applies to the following taxes: income tax, value-added tax, and excise tax. Taxpayers whose economic activities are those provided for in Articles 28 and 29 of this law, as well as those taxpayers who provide professional services, construction activities, urbanization, land development, liberal occupation, dependency relationship, or those who receive capital income exclusively, are not eligible to access the micro-enterprise regime. Taxpayers are obliged to issue invoices and request proof of sales to keep accounting records and to file income tax, and excise tax returns in accordance with the provision of the applicable tax regulations. Taxpayers subject to this regime will determine income tax by applying a 2% rate on gross income for the fiscal year. In the case of VAT and ICE, tax returns must be filed semi-annually, and they cannot act as withholding agents for income tax or VAT, except for the importation of services. In no case will companies' permanence in this regime can be greater than 5 fiscal years. A 10% income tax reduction for certain provinces, a 10% reduction of income tax payable for the 2029 fiscal year applies for taxpayer domiciled in the provinces of Carchi, Imbabura, Bolívar, Chimborazo, Tungurahua, Cotopaxi, Cañar, Azuay, and Loja. Whose main activity is agriculture, livestock, or agroindustry affected by the incident resulting from the declaration of the state of emergency, as in the case of this pandemic situation. Special deductions, a discount of 10% in the income tax rate on the value of percentage that is decided to reinvest from the profit, an additional 100% discount on expenses generated by the net increase in employees, deduction of an additional 150% of the salaries and benefit expense paid to employees with disabilities, deduction of 100% of travel expenses in the first year to be declared, and the amortization of losses up to 5 following fiscal years without exceeding in each period 25 of the profits obtained. The law for productive development. This law improves the incentives and conditions established in the Organic Code of Production, Commerce, and Investment, COPSI. This new legislation sets different types of tax rate for your investments. For example, if your project is located outside the urban areas of Quito and Guayaquil, you will be granted with 12 years and is considered as a prioritized COPSI sector, you will have 12 years of internal revenue exemption. Whereas if your project is located within the urban areas of Quito and Guayaquil and considered as a prioritized COPSI sector, you will have a tax rate of 8 years. For example, the provinces and Manabí and Esmeraldas suffered from an earthquake in the year 2016, and that is why more years or internal revenue exemption is considered in these cases. Prioritized sectors COPSI. There is a wide spectrum of sectors in which you can develop your investment projects. If your investment is considered within these sectors, you can make a request for a contract of investment. These sectors are petrochemicals, fresh, frozen, and processed foods, forestry value chain and its processed goods, biotechnology and applied software, logistics services for international trade, metalworking, renewable energy, tourism, and pharmaceuticals. Prioritizers for substitution of imports, radio, TVs, and cell phones, chemical products, ceramic products, textiles, leather, and footwear, domestic appliances, basic chemicals, pesticides, and products for agricultural use, soaps, detergents, perfumes, and toilet preparations, and cement production. The next incentives, the exemption from IST for new productive investments that enter into investment agreements, for reinvestment in productive assets, 50% of IST exemption on dividends. Dividends distributed has an exception for income, the capital increase, and it is not applicable to IFES. Exemption of the minimum advance payment of the income tax. income tax exemption applicable to profits and yields generated by shares, participation, or other rights representative of the capital. The income tax rate is established on the profit generated by the sale of shares according to the following table. Exemption from the income tax on the sale of transfer of shares in companies or trusts created to invest in real estate for relief. The deduction ceiling for the calculation of income tax for micro, small, and medium-sized companies that invest in technical training, productivity, and commercial promotion is increased from 1% to 5%. From the export and tourism sector, up to 100% of the cost and expenses for promotion and advertising can be deducted. Let's go through finally through the labor and social security regulations. After the second year of employment, the employer has the obligation to pay reserve funds to the employees with a rate of 8.33% of the gross salary paid out each month, and the payment of contributions to the Ecuadorian Social Security with a rate of 11.15%, the payment of the 13th and 14th salaries. Employees are given an extra salary called the Christmas bonus or 13th salaries, which should be paid in December, and it corresponds to a complete extra salary. The 14th salary equals the current amount of the legal minimum wage, which currently is $400, and according to the location of the workplace, it has to be paid either in April or August of each year. Employers, companies, indeed, must distribute 15% of the profit to their workers. The registration of foreign workers in the SUT, and finally, the registration of the employment contract is required with the Ministry of Labor Relations. Well, thanks for your attendance and your interest in Ecuador. Please feel free to contact Erika Beltran, our director for the Ecuador's office, who will be glad to assist with all your queries. Thanks again and have a good day.